Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Genesis Global Spiritual Center. I am Reverend Gayle Dillon. Thank you all for being here. This is Curated Conversations. This quarter we are talking about race. Last month we talked about the academic view of that, what is race. And just so you know, that video is posted, I posted it on Facebook, on Genesis Family and on Genesis Global Spiritual Center. It is also now posted on our webpage under Ministries. It's Curated Conversations, so you can find the videos there. We will be recording tonight. So before I introduce Edward, if we could all just take a breath. And so just knowing right here and right now that we call in that divine presence, that oneness with Spirit, that we all feel and know the truth of who we are right here and right now. We call in that unconditional love that we know here at Genesis is the truth of who we are as a community. And so we hold that container through this whole conversation. We allow ourselves to be fully present, fully engaged, undefended. That undefended love for one another as we begin this conversation tonight. And so I just call it good, knowing that it is always good, for it is always God. And together we say, and so it is. Amen. Please welcome Bishop Edward Donalson.
Hello, family. It's so great to be back here at Genesis and with all of you, and just in this energy and in this room and breathing together, being, which is kind of a rare thing in our current political reality. We're not always breathing, but tonight we're going to breathe together. And we're just going to allow ourselves to be in this space. How y'all doing over there? Y'all all right? All right. Just want to make sure y'all good over there. I see you in the cheap seats. Okay. No, do what you do. Do what you do. Last month, has it been a month? Yeah. It's been a whole month since we've been together. It's crazy. Last month, we talked about race from a very academic place. We talked about race as a social construct and not a genetic reality. And we talked about how we're talking about race and how talking about race impacts how we feel about race. This month, we're making a kind of a turn. We're headed toward what do we do in this time, right? But this is our pivot moment. And in this pivot moment, we're really talking about our experience of race. This is about experience. In fact, it's really about story. These curated conversations only work because we're getting to know one another. And we're getting to be present. And better than that, we're getting to be proximate. And the gift of proximity is that once I know you and love you, a whole lot of the barriers start to chip away and fall away. And you go from being that to being them. And you go from being the object to being the subject. And so the goal of tonight is to move into that space of subjectivity for all of us. So if race has been a difficult conversation for you, breathe. Tonight's going to be about experience. And it's going to be about experience contextualized in race. Does that make sense? Are we okay with that? So we're going to hear some story. We're going to open up the opportunity for you to ask questions about story and even possibly to share story. So tonight is story time. It's dark already. It's cold outside. So we're just going to cuddle in together and have a little story time. Is that okay? I have some friends that are here to help me and that have been so gracious as to share their story. I'm at that age where these work and then they don't. And so they go on, and then they come off, only because I don't want to get bifocals, because they are not cute. And the no-line bifocals make you fall down when you look. So, so we'll just do this off and on thing. I'm just giving you a heads up. Let's see. Our first guest, I think you probably know, Phillip Blake. And Phillip was born in 1956 in Chicago, the fourth child of 5 of a career Army officer. and then moved back to Philadelphia when he was 2 and spent the rest of his life in West Philadelphia. Yay! 56 and Christian. I'm just saying. Absolutely. Okay. Cobbs Creek Parkway. Okay. We're from the same place. The son of a Philadelphia school teacher after retiring from the Army. He says, I remember as far as race is concerned, I could go weeks, perfectly happy, normal weeks within my community and not see or interact with white people. Spent some time at Temple, then joined the USCG in November of 75 through November of 80, was stationed all over the place. 5 years from Governor's Island in New York to Port Clarence Bay, 80 miles north of Nome. Spent 18 months in southern Italy, in the province of something I can't pronounce, in the region of another place I can't pronounce. And he got a whole different perspective. Believe it or not, I'm leaving for Italy next week, and I can't pronounce anywhere I'm going. Okay, gives him a whole different perspective on Italian people than what he had previously known in Philly. And so he returned to Seattle in December of 1980, and in 86 began his career as a realtor. Then the economic crash happened, and now he's at, well, let's see, Metro? Yeah. Met Janice in 2010, married her in 2014, and brought his heathen soul to Genesis. And that's what lands him in front of you guys tonight. Would you guys help me celebrate Phillip? Now we have another wonderful young lady that's with us, and I should know her bio by heart, but I don't. That's all right. She is a passionista of God, family, life, and learning. Sylvian Estrella is a visual storyteller through the medium of film and photography. She earned her bachelor's degree in photographic science from Brooks Institute and added digital media degree a few years back, and is currently working on expanding her visual media education to include graphic design technology. She's a strong believer in community involvement and outreach. She's been in media production as a volunteer for the past 9 years at Matt Talbot Center in Seattle, serving the homeless and addicted population of Seattle. If you've ever seen moments of meditation that I do weekly, Sylvian is the videographer behind that and the editor behind that, at least for this school year so far. And so will you help me welcome Sylvian? We're going to ground our work as we jump in a little bit of bell hooks, right? You can't go wrong grounding your work in bell hooks. And this is what Bell has to say about stereotypes. Stereotypes, however inaccurate, are one form of representation. Like fictions, they're created to serve as substitutions, standing in for what is real. They are not to tell it like it is, but to invite and encourage pretense. They are a fantasy, a projection onto the other that makes them less threatening. Stereotypes abound where there is distance. Our goal tonight is to erase some stereotypes and close the distance. So we'll jump right in. Let's see, this technology. Okay. Sylvian, we'll start with you. Where did you grow up? And in telling us where you grew up, what did you learn about race in your neighborhood?
Okay, so I grew up in Arizona, south of Phoenix, in a little town that I thought was Mayberry. Pretty much my parents kept me sheltered from racism. I didn't know it existed. I lived in a neighborhood that was pretty much a melting pot. We actually lived on the north side in our town, which there was a south side where the blacks lived and also the Mexican population lived, and we lived on the other side. My mom was an engineer at an electronics firm, and my dad was a golf pro. So at the country club resort, so we always were around different races. And growing up in my neighborhood, I didn't see color, and my parents didn't tell me that we were any different. After school, we'd play baseball in the streets, and it didn't matter what color you were, you wanted the best player on your team. And I usually was a captain. But I didn't, what they taught me was that you earn things by your own merit, by working hard, and you are no better or less than anyone else. I knew that we had different cultures, but I didn't know that we thought differently as far as being a person. That's my earliest. So it was pretty much an accepting environment. I didn't realize until later that it really wasn't. Do you want me to keep on going there?
Well, let's find out from Phillip. We know a little bit about where you grew up, but how did where you grow up inform your idea around race?
Okay. Is this okay? All right. Ooh. I grew up in West Philadelphia, which is different than the rest of Philadelphia. Everybody in my neighborhood was black. Everybody I knew was black. Our sports teams were black. Our recreation was. My whole interaction with the white community was whenever we went to Upper Darby. We had to pass through Upper Darby to get to Darby, which is where my dad and my mother were both raised, which would be like saying they were raised in Burien, okay, from Philadelphia. It's an all-black town just outside of Philadelphia. So when my aunt, my dad's sister, lived in the house he was raised in, so we went there. Everybody knew my dad. The whole neighborhood knew him, so it was a very safe environment. My dad was a school teacher, became a principal later. I didn't have this whole gang thing. My family pretty much, like Sylvian, kept me pretty much safe. The only threat to my existence was that whole Upper Darby thing. And we literally crossed the bridge over Cobb's Creek, and it became Upper Darby, and that's where the McDonald's was when McDonald's opened. So in order for us to go there, we'd go on our bikes, we'd go en masse, and we'd leave a couple of people outside McDonald's. Nobody had a whole bunch of money anyway, so we could get, I don't even remember, but we would have a McDonald's experience, and then sometimes be able to get back across that bridge, being chased and screamed and called names. You get on the other side of the bridge, and we would stand there for half hour or so screaming names back and forth at each other. That was my first experience with race, because that was the only place where there was a different race. It never was violent necessarily, but it was not safe. But the only other experience that I can talk about are the police. That was the most dangerous situation in our neighborhood. If there was an experience about race, and that race was blue, because it really didn't matter if it was a black policeman or a white policeman. In most cases, it was blue, and the police were dangerous. And, my father made sure all three boys knew that if you got stopped by the police, to behave, because they had pretty much a license to kill you. We had a cousin that was a police officer, and he would share some of the stories, the inside stories of the Philadelphia Police Department, Mayor Rizzo. It was a war. So that whole thing wasn't safe. But I was pretty much shielded from that until teenage years. That does it.
I think it's fascinating how our very first experiences with race and our neighborhoods really, really shape the trajectory of the way we're informed about race. And it's something as a parent that you have to think through. Intentionality around where you live and why you live there. I actually happen to be born in Philadelphia, right around the corner. And that is amazing. 5641 Christian Street, right on the corner. But I had a hybrid experience because while our family home was in West Philadelphia, I had grandparents who lived on the main line, which is to say they lived in Bellevue. They lived in Bryn Mawr, and so I went to school in a place called Aston, PA. And so I would go home to my neighborhood where there were no white people, and I would go to school where there were no black people, and I mean, no black people anywhere. So I had this real bifurcated racial experience of being submerged in black culture and being submerged in white culture and having to code switch constantly. Constant code switching. And by the time we moved to Seattle, it was normative for me to live that kind of bifurcated existence. But what was problematic is we couldn't find a black community when we moved here. They said, go to the Central District, and we laughed. Because we said, these are a couple blocks. Where's the community? Where's the city? We're looking for the city. And they said, this is it. This is it. This is right here. So that begins to shape the way we engage and the way we encounter with people. What would you say, Sylvian, was the primary message about race that was communicated in your home as you think in terms of being a Latina woman?
Well, my parents didn't really talk about race until I asked them one time, because there was some problems going on in high school with racial problems, and there was some violence going on, and I came home, and they had never told me anything about being Mexican American or Latina. Just, we just practiced different cultural things, and but then my mom shared the story with me just because I had an encounter with a little bit of racism in my high school, and I was so surprised. I couldn't believe it, because my mom and dad grew up in the time in Arizona where drinking fountains were marked. If you were not white, you couldn't drink out of certain drinking fountains. And my mom and dad said that in school there was a line painted on the sidewalk, and when they crossed that line, they weren't allowed to speak Spanish. They could only speak English. And my mom actually worked at the Dairy Queen where blacks and Mexicans weren't allowed to go in. So there was that, and I was just so shocked because it kind of like really popped my balloon, I think, my bubble, that because I thought we were like Mayberry. I didn't think that Andy Griffith couldn't have been my dad, but it really wasn't like that. And but my parents continued to tell us, all three of us, my siblings, that it's your responsibility to behave the way that you should and treat others the way that you want to be treated, and never to use your race or where you came from or what neighborhood you lived in as an excuse for any kind of behavior or to take anything from anyone either. So.
Wow. It's interesting when we start talking about our stories, we can see so many layers, and hearing your story reminds me of how hegemony really works. Hegemony says Andy Griffith could be my dad because there is no representation of your dad. Not because Andy Griffith is such a great dad, but because you don't have a reference point.
Well, I didn't even realize that until I was like in my 40s that when I watched the reruns of Andy Griffith, there were no people of color on that show. All those years growing up, I didn't see it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt watching, Good Times and shows like that, because I couldn't relate to them at all. And so when the Cosby Show came on, I finally was like, oh, that's us. We're on TV. That's my family. Look at that. There's us. But for years, there was no real representation of what my family of origin experience was. Yeah, that's shocking. What about you, Philip?
Okay. What is it that I mean, my brain is just racing around.
Right. And then there's that.
Yeah.
What was the primary message about race communicated in your home?
Safety. I mean, as I got older, staying alive. As I got younger, when I was younger, it's like that experience that we had going to Upper Darby, going to the McDonald's. I mean, there was just a constant. I mean, Philadelphia is a city of brotherly love. I just love saying that. But it was a dangerous place for black kids, teenagers. Lots of kids were getting killed, and like I said, so the main focus in my family was keeping everybody safe in a way that didn't scare anybody. I never grew up afraid. I felt like whatever was going to come, my family was going to help me out with it. So I had a big family. I had, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, my mom and dad. I mean, I always felt invincible. That's how I grew up. I felt like there was nothing ever bad was going to happen because my dad wasn't going to let it. And I always knew there was somebody standing right behind me no matter where I was in the community. But it didn't mean that I could just be reckless and stupid. What's funny about you mentioning your dual citizenship, I went to school at the Haverford School.
Get out. My grandparents lived around the corner from Haverford College.
Yeah, which was right across the street
216
from the
Landover
Haverford School.
Road. Yeah.
Yeah, so it would be like going to Lakeside, you guys. Yeah, I went there. So I had the same kind of deal. I would shed all of that coming back into the hood, and I would then, going up Lancaster Pike, I would shed all of my hood experiences going out to put my tie and my blazer on. My penny loafers, yep. And I wouldn't be caught dead in Philadelphia wearing penny loafers. Mm-hmm. But, I was on the squash team. I couldn't tell anybody, not on the team. I wouldn't put myself on the team, but I learned how to play squash out there. But nobody in my neighborhood knew that I was playing squash. That would not be something I could even talk about. Most people, because if I hadn't gone to Haverford, I wouldn't know what squash was either. So, but to go back to the answer to the question, it's safety. That would be my answer.
I didn't know that we weren't safe.
Yeah.
In Philadelphia. My great uncle was the late Honorable Jeremiah Shabazz, who's the founder of Temple Number 13 in the Nation of Islam, and would have been probably Malcolm X's successor in New York had he not had an affair and been disciplined by the nation. But he introduced Muhammad Ali to Islam, and Temple Number 13 is this infamous temple in Philadelphia, which was the headquarters of Black Brothers Inc. And I never realized that those cars that were following us to go get ice cream were, the fruit of Islam. And these were security, armed security that was following us to the ice cream store. I didn't realize these things as a kid. It was just my favorite uncle who bought us 2 scoops of ice cream apiece. And that was the big thing. Because when you went with your grandparents or your parents, you could only get 1 scoop. But when you went with Uncle Jeremiah, you were guaranteed to get 2 scoops of ice cream. So I always wanted to go with him. But when I got ready to go to college, I'll never forget my mother sat me down and she said, I need to say something to you. And I said, yes, what is it? She says, I need you to keep your nose clean. And I said, well, of course I'm going to keep my nose clean. She said, no, I really, really need you to keep your nose clean. And I said, okay, what's this about? She says, well, your uncle's on the FBI list, and there's a file on you, and there's a file on us, and so I need you to really just stay out of trouble. And I thought, okay, I will. And for the first time in my life, she said, and watch out for white policemen.
Yeah.
That was the first time she had ever said that to me.
Yeah.
Going away to college, she said, they will be the death of you, and I want you to come home. And that's where that narrative, it never started in West Philly. It didn't start until I left Seattle. And I didn't know we had been unsafe because we had been protected for so long, unbeknownst to me. What's your most powerful memory attached to race?
Positive or negative?
It's powerful. It's yours.
Probably moving here. From growing up in Arizona and going to school in Santa Barbara, it was a melting pot in both areas. Moving here, it was not. And I moved here when I was 25. I married my love in college, and he was from Seattle and wanted to move back. And so I thought it was an adventure because I'd never been to Seattle. He warned me beforehand that the sun didn't come out for 9 months, and I didn't believe him because I thought he was joking because I had lived in Arizona and Santa Barbara, and we had sun every day. I thought there's no place that doesn't have sun. But we moved in December in the dead of winter, and we got here at night.
Wow.
And the next morning I looked out the window and I was really excited. We were staying with his parents when we first came. And there was no sun, and I said to him, "Where's the sun?" And he said, "Remember I told you that it doesn't come out for 9 months?" And I said, "I thought you were kidding." And I started crying. I cried for a year. But that leads me to coming here. I thought it was going to be an adventure, and I thought that we would be embraced, because everywhere that I went, I experienced being embraced, not being segregated or spoken in any kind of negative way. But I remember going up to, and my in-laws lived in, I don't know if you're familiar with the Kirkland area, but they lived in Holmes Point area, which is a nice place by the lake. And there's a Bartell's up the hill. And so I went up to the Bartell's because I needed something and some stuff. And I was at the cash register, and I remember I was very smiley and friendly because this is a new place for me. I'm meeting new people. And I was 25 and very naive. And the cashier was very curt with me, almost, and she was rude. She threw the receipt at me, and she didn't say thank you. And I'm like, she's having a really bad day. And so I let it slide, and I said thank you, and I walked out, but it kept happening. And then it kind of like hit me that, because I watched her how she was with the white customer that was after me, and she was friendly, and she thanked them and made little small talk with them. And it was then that I realized that it wasn't me, because I was very friendly to her, that it was about race. So I went home and I kind of stewed in it a little bit and trying to figure out how I was going to handle it. And I told my husband about it, and he's white. He was white and never experienced another culture until he went to Santa Barbara and met me, really. So he didn't understand what it felt like. And I realized that he wasn't going to do anything about it because he didn't kind of believe me. So I went up to the store myself, and I asked to speak to the manager, and I remember that was the first time that I really had to stand up for myself, and as far as race goes. And I said to the manager, I can shop anywhere. I'm choosing to shop here, but I'm telling you this is what's happening, and if you can't treat me, if your employees can't treat me with respect, then I'll shop elsewhere. And he said that that was not acceptable and that he was going to have a talk with his employees. And so I said, okay, well, I'll give you another chance. And I knew that I needed to make friends with people in the store just to be accepted. And so I remember there was a German lady there that was working there, and she was kind of curt with me too initially, but I was very friendly with her, and I decided, because I had prayed about it, and I decided that I was going to be her friend, and I would talk to her and complimented her, remembered her name and everything. And the next time I came in, the other cashier that was really rude to me and threw the receipt at me before, that she had a talking to. And so when I came up, I was friendly and smiled and said hello, and I could tell that she really did not want to say hello to me, but she had to because she had a talking to. And she said, I remember looking at her and she said, hello. And then she got the receipt and she said, thank you. And I said, you're welcome. See you next time. So that's how I handled it. But I thought it was isolated to her, but it really wasn't, because what shocked me the most was being on the east side, and I'm thinking there's a lot of educated people on this side, and educated people are not racist, is what I thought. And they know, I mean, they're educated. They can't think like that. I didn't know that was far from the truth, because when I started having children and they were in elementary school, man, it really, racism really reared its head with my kids. Now, I didn't grow up having to deal with that, but my kids, who were half Mexican and half Caucasian, half Swedish, they're Swedekins. And they're really pretty. I'm just saying.
Says the proud mother.
And talented.
And brilliant.
Right. Anyway, they had to face it. And from these parents that were educated, it was coming out on the playground, and my kids, my oldest boy was getting called names, and he was an awesome athlete, and he was being shut out of games, and they told him if he wanted to play, he should go back to Mexico, or he should go do yard work. And he came home and he was so angry, and what hurt me the most was that he didn't want to be Mexican. He didn't want to be Latino, and he told me, and that just hurt my heart so much, because that's half of me. He's half of me. And but he also had a white family, and I was so then I went to the library and I started getting all kinds of books about Mexican history and history in the United States and everything. And of course my little kids did not want to hear that, and I'm trying to infuse my culture, but it was like going uphill, because I was the only Mexican for like 10 years in that neighborhood. We had built a house there, and there was only I was the only person of color in that whole neighborhood, except for a black man who was the caretaker for the Weyerhaeuser summer home.
Wow.
So we connected, and we would talk, and he would fish with my son and stuff. But I was just so shocked that people on the east side would be racist. It just floored me.
That's really powerful. And this idea that education changes the way that we are oriented in the world. As a person working in the academy, I assure you, it does not change the way that we're working in the world. Let me check back in with Phillip. Let me ask you a question. How has your spiritual home or church community informed your thoughts on race?
Okay. First, we're here doing this. Like, I think this is really brave that, we're stepping out on faith and hoping that conversation remedies some hurt feelings, and then provide some understanding. So the fact that we're here right now doing what we're doing right now, that's fabulous. And, some of the things that I've talked to Gayle about and to Carol, that church, for me, is kind of in the distance my whole life. I didn't spend a whole lot of time in church, but I've always believed that church should be a part of a community, and a community is a part of what we have going on, and part of the problems that we're having in this country is that we don't have community. We don't spend a lot of time with family, community, church, all of those institutions that are supposed to put us all together, So I'm new at the whole church thing, but I am proud to be here at this place at this time with you guys. So
I think this is a great place to be. I'm really
Yeah.
proud to be here in this space with you guys too, even though this isn't my church. It kind of is. Low key, don't tell anybody. Shh.
Just let me just say this one thing. I've been in and out. Gayle had a sermon 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I can't remember. I don't know if you guys remember, but she talked kind of about she kind of addressed directly this whole NFL thing. Mm-hmm. She talked about the idea of what is being protested, so that we don't get caught up in the minutia of Star-Spangled Banners and, Pledge Allegiances, because I spent 5 years in the service. I'm a veteran, and I pledged a solemn oath to the Constitution of the United States, not to a song and, jumping up and down and wrapping myself in a flag that nobody really, that's making all this noise, cares about at all. So thank you. And I thanked you at the time, and I think that is a testament to knowing that I'm in the right place.
I want to thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, absolutely. I want to look here at the lyrics. Of the Star-Spangled Banner as we, No, verse 3. Star-Spangled Banner, third verse.
Oh, third verse, the one that they don't sing.
The one we don't sing. There's a forgotten verse. Yeah, and there's a reason, probably, that we don't really sing it very often. Here we go. And where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country should leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps' pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph does wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. National anthem lyrics. What is in one moment celebratory for one group can in the exact same moment become crisis and tyranny for another group. And what we can hold dear and precious and bring us to such a space of joy and a feeling of collective triumph can also bring us to a feeling of collective terror. And it's where we enter the story. It's where we show up. It's where we arrive. It's what we bring to the moment. That is what we're trying to be sensitive to when we have these conversations, is realizing that everyone brings something to the moment. And your moment and my moment are not the same moment, even when we're in the same space, because of what I bring to that particular space in that particular time. So I think we should open it up. I want to say thank you to these two very courageous beings for sharing story with us and letting us have a peek into their world and into their experiences. And what I know is that there are some experiences collectively in the room that are yet unnamed, that we want to make space to name. And what I also understand is there's questions about experience, particularly experiences that are not our own, that we might want to surface up. And so if you, I don't know, do we have the 3x5 cards again? Well, we didn't use them last time. This is a pretty courageous group. And so if you have something that you want to ask, come right up to the microphone and let's be community together in conversation. So there's the mic and here's your chance, and let's do this together. Who's going first?
That's good. We covered everything.
Well, we've solved the race problem in America.
Yeah.
We've done it in 38 minutes. I don't know what's taken so long. So there you have it. They should have just put this panel together, right? No, I know that it takes a minute for us to formulate our question and then to bring ourselves to the moment to actually ask the question. One of the things that was interesting to me that you shared, Sylvian, was around moving to Seattle and the expectations of what that would mean coming from someplace else. And I think I had a similar experience moving here from the East Coast, not really understanding what the Pacific Northwest culture is. And so I want to lift that up in this moment, that we live in a very particular location, and the Pacific Northwest is not like any other place. And we have a way of doing Pacific Northwest nice that doesn't exist in other places. So racism can hide in the Pacific Northwest in insidious ways because it is not as overt. There were places in Philadelphia, you don't go over there. You don't go over there, and they don't come over here. And that's good. Like, everybody's okay with it. But at least you know. When you move to Seattle, they say you can live anywhere. It doesn't really matter. Everybody lives everywhere. There's no real... And it's not always exactly how that goes. Yeah. So this is a dangerous space to navigate because you don't know what people are experiencing. And it's not just dangerous for black people or Latino people. It's dangerous for white people in this space because you don't know who your neighbors are. You don't know what they think. You don't know what their values are. It's dangerous for queer people. It's dangerous for people who are not religious because you don't know. And that Pacific Northwest nice makes us smile and put a thin veneer over disdain. And so that's just something we should name in the room, that many times people are responding to us because they don't feel safe. Not because of what we have necessarily brought to them, but because of the experience of the environment, of being caught unaware time after time after time.
I have a question.
You have a question?
I do.
Yes.
For you. Because I was in a white community and was married to a white man, and I have a question for you in that, do you feel like people of color bring up race too much? Because I know that on the east side, my white friends believe that we do, that we're too sensitive about it.
Mm.
How do you feel about it?
That's open for anybody.
Personally.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that, sorry. So personally, and I was born here in Renton and raised in North Bend. You want to talk about a white community? That was about as white as it got. So I don't believe we talk enough about race. I think what Edward referred to as that veneer And when you don't talk about it, then you don't know what people's experiences are. And so I think we should talk about it more. And I think that if you have people that say you're talking too much about it, it's because it's making them uncomfortable. And it gets back to that thing about white privilege and them not understanding. Because most people that are white and you say white privilege, you get offended because you don't understand what that means. And all that means is that if I go out to coffee with Edward and Phillip, I will have an experience with Edward and Phillip, depending on where I am. That experience will change entirely when I go out to coffee by myself. And I learned that at a very young age. And so I always understood, because of the color of my skin, I was treated different. You know, I didn't have to worry about when I got pulled over in a car. My mother never told me to be nice to a police officer. And trust me, there were times that I was just mouthy. And what I realized was, that's a privilege. That's a privilege. And so, you know, not to be offended by it, you can't change it. It's just the society that we live in. And so to talk about race, to me, is all the time, it's important. Because if I don't know what your experience is, then I can either dumb myself down and assume your and my experiences are always exactly the same, or I'm just callous and I don't care what your experience is. And then we're living on as a human race, and we should care about each other. So that's just what I think.
Thank you. It's please come. Oh, no problem.
Do you want me to bring the mic?
Okay. They'll bring it to you. Oh, this is like Phil Donahue.
Yeah, this. Do I have to do
Oprah didn't
anything to
have the
speak
cord.
into it? Okay.
There you go.
All right. I think the biggest problem in Seattle is that most of us believe we're liberal, and most of us believe we are not racist. We are absolutely, we're not guilty of that. And I would have, with my background and upbringing, I always believed there's no way I'm racist. Until I read Jodi Picoult's book. Have you seen it? I'm sorry, but Jodi Picoult wrote a book this last year. And if you read that book, I first acknowledged I'm a racist. And I'm ashamed.
So I would like to say to you, thank you for your bravery. And I also would like to say to you that the fabric of our culture and society is racist. That we're oriented in that way. And let me take the shame out of it and say the shame is that we share brokenness in humanity. The fact that you can name it and say this is where the brokenness manifests in me means that you're already healing the world. And so I want to thank you for being a part of that healing. And it's important that we just sit in our own stuff sometimes and know it and sense it and feel it. And then we say, how do we heal from it? And just naming it and knowing it and identifying it is a gift of healing. To hear someone say, I didn't think I could be racist, but the reality is I am racist. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Anybody else want to ask a question from where they're seated? More comfort?
It's not your fault. We all have been domesticated in the society, and now you have a choice to become aware, and once you're aware, you create this habit. Like, you catch yourself in that moment, then you change your habit. So it's just about being aware, and it's not everybody's racist, partly, so we've all been domesticated and need to change that.
And there are ways in which I hold racism. I don't believe that black people can be racist, because racism in and of itself connotes a power that isn't embedded systemically in blackness. We don't hold that. We can be prejudiced. We can very much be prejudiced. But I hold racism in my DNA because of the nature of the construct of the culture and society that we live in. And there are moments when the colonization that happens in our minds through socialization, mass media, multiple streams of input, rear their head in me, and I have to decolonize my own mind about certain things. For example, I have a 12-year-old daughter who's beautiful. Really beautiful and talented and brilliant, and she's Asian, and which is interesting because neither her mother nor I are Asian, but she says that she is. This is the nomenclature she's chosen for her own self-identity, which is okay. You're 12, it'll change. But she has a grade of hair that is not particularly European. It's not all the way not European, but it's not all the way European. And there's this idea that it's prettier straight. That's like the cultural norm. Like, little black girls go through this thing where they get to a certain age where they come out of the braids and they go into this.
Okay, good.
Oh, I'm glad she's up for it. Tell her I am too. We'll meet at 9. And but they go through this process where they either straighten their hair by heat or they straighten their hair by chemical. And I had to make a decision as a dad that I would not tell her she was beautiful because she had gotten her hair done in a particular style or a particular way, but that she is beautiful because she is beautiful. And that's an internalized racism that has to be dealt with, right? It's an internalized colonization. And so every day we're working to decolonize our own imprints and images of what it means to live in a racist society. Anybody else?
Well, I plead the fifth. My grandfather was the biggest redneck in the world. He hated anybody and everything of any non-color than white. So I grew up in that. And I grew up in a real small rural area where the closest to a person of color was Indian, Native American Indian. Mm-hmm. And in that culture, they would call that person the N-word. Mm-hmm. And luckily he was our running back and he was a big boy and he could handle himself. So what I'm getting at is that I didn't want to, as I grew up, it's kind of like having somebody who's an alcoholic. I am the next generation that isn't going to do that. Mm-hmm. And in that part, there's innocence and being naive, and where I work, I'm in customer service, and I want to believe that I'm treating everybody the same. Everybody, no matter what. I'm here to help you. Just let's figure it out. And then we go to your question, and I get called. I get pulled the racist card. And I'm sitting there going, I don't understand that. I don't understand it in a hate way. I just don't understand it, and that's where the innocence is. And I want to be educated along that. I want to understand that. I want to understand, is it their story and they're just putting it on me? And then I bear that cross, and okay, I can deal with that. Or did I actually say something or do something to them that caused them to trigger that word? And if, in fact, I did do that, I want to know what that is so that I can at least look at it. Will I change it or not? I don't know, because I don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. Can I change it or not? Well, we can, and I will. So that's where I'm at, is that I want to hug everybody. I want to be, I don't care. I don't care what your color or your nationality or if you're bi or straight or transgender or whatever. I just don't care. But in the innocence of that, my history still can come up and get me, and that's where I have the issue, and that's where I'm continually looking at myself.
Out of curiosity, when someone says that was racist, or you're a racist, or why are you being racist, or whatever it is they say, how do you respond?
Well, the first thing that happens is my stomach feels like it just went down a chute.
Yeah, of course.
And then probably my face turns red because I didn't expect that. And then I start asking, well, how did I? I mean, where do you get that? And then if they've gotten to that point, at least where I'm at, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to define it. They don't want to say it. They're just to the point that you're racist. And I've been prosecuted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean, is that innocence of not knowing. What did I do?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And they're the people who can educate me the best and the quickest.
So there's this thing in race work, in this work, where people, particularly multiple burden people, black, lesbian, woman, poor, may be tired of educating white, straight, cisgendered male, because she's educating about 52 layers constantly, right? She's educating about what it means to be poor. She's educating about what it means to be female. She's educating about what it means to be lesbian. She's educating about what it means to be black. She spends all her day educating. And so there's a pushback that says it's not my job to educate you, that it's your job to take responsibility to educate yourself out of your own internal racism. So sometimes when people are not responsive, it's not an ill will. It's a fatigue and a weariness of being constantly asked by the world to explain themselves, to validate themselves, so I'm already oppressed, and then you add another oppression onto me that asks me to be your educator. And I'm saying that so that you might understand why when people get to that point, it's sometimes too late. And sometimes it's not. It's just every encounter. And I guess the only thing that I have to share is, if that is getting pulled multiple times, the only way to know what's triggering it is to look at the pattern. When does this get pulled? When do people get to the I'm a racist place? And if there's any similarity, maybe doing some investigation around the similarities of the situation or the circumstance. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. I think this, yes.
I want to talk about an experience that happened to me as a direct result of being here last month. I look at you guys and I say, you're just like me, and what I'm looking at is economics. I was walking around in Burien going to get my car, and there was a homeless guy. I'm assuming he was homeless. He looked like he was begging, and I had a decision, and it was a black man. And do I walk here, or do I walk through this archway over here, right next to him? I started for the archway, and I said, get over yourself. You just went to, you guys had a conversation. And so I said, I just walked past him, and I said hello, and he said hello back. And I'm walking by, and I'm wondering, what's that building over there? And I thought, well, maybe he knows. He's standing there. So I turned around and looked at him and said, do you know what that building is? And he looked at me and said, it's some sort of medical thing. And And I said, thanks. And I turned and started walking away, and he says, but that's all I know. And I could have just kept walking or just, yelled something from as I'm walking away, but I didn't. I said, okay, I thought about last time we were here. I turned around and I looked him in the eye and said, you knew more than I did. And you could just see him. He's like, wow, somebody saw me. Somebody, asked me a question and acknowledged my answer. And again, like Jan over there, I didn't think I was racist, but of course I know I am. But he just, that really fed me to see him feel good about being seen and being heard and being acknowledged. So thank you for putting the bug in my ear.
Thank you. No shaming. This is a no shaming zone.
Sure. That way I can be seen. So there's two sides of this. I work with children, a lot of them, and somebody came to me with a story about these two little kids, little 3-year-old, 4-year-old kids, and one was black and one was white, and they both had white shirts and jeans on and little white tennis shoes, and the two boys, arm in arm, go up the teacher, and she's not going to be able to tell. She's not going to tell. And the teacher's looking at him and she goes, you can't tell us apart now, can you? Because they thought because they were wearing the same outfit that they were twins. And I just went, oh, I love kids. They don't know race. I have a lot of employees, and I have been taken to the Equal Employment Opportunity Office on several occasions when I have had to do disciplinary on people who have done horrible things to children. And I'm called a racist because I disciplined my employee, whether it was Filipino or Asian or black or even some of the whites. And it's like, you don't understand. I don't believe I'm racist. I believe you hurt children, and that is why you're no longer here. It has nothing to do with your color, your size, your age, any of that. And I get frustrated because it hurts my feelings, I have to say, that I'm told that. And part of it is that just take responsibility, no matter what. Just take responsibility for yourself, and don't hurt kids. And so for me, I don't know how to interact with that because all I want to say is take responsibility. I'm not doing this because you're black or you're older than I am or younger than I am or you're straight and I'm gay or whatever. So I just sometimes get frustrated with that. And it's not an excuse to make an excuse for doing things that are not okay.
Curiosity. If you pulled your records, not EEO, if you pulled your records and you saw a pattern, would you say more people of color hurt kids? Would you say more people of color get caught hurting the kids? Would you say, I guess the numbers won't lie.
Right. It's two people, and of the 6 people, only 2. One was Filipino and one was black, and then the rest were white people who really shouldn't have been working with children anyways.
That's how you sleep at night.
Yeah.
Because the proof is always in the pudding.
That's a good way of looking at it.
That's how you sleep
Yeah.
at night. It just bears out, and this is the truth. And people will always have a feeling,
Yeah.
particularly when they've done something they shouldn't do.
Yeah.
They will always
Point
find
the
a
fin-
reason.
Yeah. Let me point the finger at somebody
Yeah.
besides myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
So I kind of want to touch on some things actually they said, is that there are times when I feel like the race card is being played in situations where it isn't race related, but it's getting thrown back at me because I am white. And I'm super sensitive around racism, and I don't want to offend anybody, and I don't believe, like, in general that I'm racist. I mean, maybe if you dig somewhere deep, I think we all have it in us, but in general, I'm super accepting of everybody, and there are times when I really feel like it's not appropriate, and it's not race related, but it's getting thrown at me because you can. And so what does somebody do in that respect? Because it's not like all of a sudden white privilege is used so much now, and so now it's white privilege and I don't understand. And and it's like, what does somebody in my position do in that sense? Because I don't want to offend you by saying, I can explain it to them blue in the face that it's not race related, but in other people's minds it is race related, and so it's frustrating, and I don't know, what do you do in that situation? Or what do you
I'm curious.
advise?
I'm really curious as to what is the metrics by which one decides it is not race related. What's the metrics?
Well, if, for example, if you're in customer service and you're saying no to somebody, well, you're saying no to me because I'm black. No, I'm saying no to you for X, Y, and Z. And then it becomes a whole, no, it's because I'm black and what, okay.
There is a story, and the story is informed more than likely by experience. And then we have to ask the question. So I had a meeting at work this week in which I said something was racist. And then I clarified it and said, I also don't believe that anyone in this building is a racist. But this is what I need you to see is systemically racist. Here's the system. And the system, whether you are a racist or not, is a racist system. You happen to be the person in the system. And the system needs to change. So then the question is, let's look at policies and see where those policies might be biased against a particular group of people. So maybe it isn't you, the person, and maybe you're just following, it's the policy. It doesn't mean the policy is intrinsically not in and of itself either classist, elitist, racist, sexist, right? Policies are all of these things, and they can be skewed, and people's experience is, I'm experiencing racism. You may not be a racist, but that doesn't change the impact of my experience of racism in this moment. I don't know the particulars of what you do, but I'm thinking through, if that gets brought up multiple times, then we should check the metrics. There's a way in which women will say that we're sexually harassed, and men will say, I didn't harass you, and I know I didn't harass you, and so it will be dismissed because the metric is, I didn't feel like I did it, therefore it wasn't done. And so we have to say, let's hear the victim. Let's hear the marginalized. Let's hear the ones who are not at the center of power and say, well, maybe the system is doing something and I'm caught in a bigger system. And so I don't know that to be true because I don't have the information, but it is just a look at what could be a way out. And you might say, you know what? These policies are skewed against this particular type of person, and let's revisit the policy because the policy is making me look like a racist. And I don't want to keep hearing that garbage, so you're going to have to fix the policy. I don't know. But that could be one way of hearing that complaint registered in a very different place. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, please do.
I kind of think, I believe that our society as a whole have been conditioned to generalize things about races. Like we can say that we're not racist, but we can be somewhat racist. Like I'll give you an example. If and I've been with my friend when we're walking down the street, and if a person is walking,
Is it a boy?
yes.
Oh. I happen to know him. That's why. Sorry, go ahead.
And a white woman is walking on the same sidewalk, she'll pull up her purse. Or they'll walk on the other side of the street when they see him coming. And he wouldn't harm anyone. But I've seen that a lot with men, black or Mexican, if they're walking down a street. And you might not think that you're racist, but you've got a preconceived idea that this could be danger. So you're going to walk on the other side of the street, or you're going to clear yourself away from that person. Whereas if it were a white man walking down the street, you wouldn't think twice about it, probably. Might not. Well, depending on who you are, or what color you are, you would just walk by, and you wouldn't feel that sense of danger. Or if someone knocks on your door, if it's a person of color, you might think twice about opening it, because it could be, you might perceive that as the danger. So I think our society has conditioned us to believe that certain colors could possess danger to us.
We are conditioned that way, and the narrative comes so fast, so often, and it's reinforced in such subtle ways. Las Vegas was a horrific tragedy. I mean, it's the magnitude of the tragedy in Las Vegas is breathtaking. I mean, the loss of life, the loss of safety, it's just, and we heard over and over and over again, the shooter doesn't fit the profile. The shooter is a lone wolf. The shooter is and I get so confused. What profile doesn't he fit? Like, no, he's exactly the type of person that does this mass shooting thing. Because he did it. So, yeah, that's the way in which it works, right? That we're constantly conditioned, and there's this idea, and there's this American exceptionalism that no one can be scared of us. And that's the narrative of white privilege, right? North Korea shouldn't have bombs because it's scary. And so we want you to put all your bombs away. But we're not putting our bombs away, and actually we've actually dropped them on people before. Like, we're scary to the rest of the world. But the narrative is we can't possibly be scary to anybody. So that idea that people of color are bodily threats to the world is such a pervasive narrative that we respond so much to that my wife was driving down the street by Rainier Beach with my daughter in the back of the truck, and there were a group of young men on the corner being loud, and she locked her car doors. And she is, well, you saw her. She's just as beautiful and chocolate as she could be. But she looked at those young men, and their volume was a threat. But her car is loud. And so the young men heard her lock her doors. And they said to her, "Oh, we ain't even worried about you, miss." And she cried all the way home. Because her instinct to protect had been informed by a narrative. We have nephews that could be those boys. We have sons that could be those boys. And yet the narrative is so pervasive that even a mother would respond that way because we're enculturated in a racist society. It's not about a racist individual. It's about systemic racism that gets in the fabric of all of us.
I know you said that you can be very tired of educating ignorant, naive people such as myself. I grew up in this area, and but you're on the stage. You're volunteered to be here, so
I'm here to educate.
so I would just like to know what it is like living in the Northwest, living in Seattle, in particular, as a person of color. Just hear stories.
Can I take that?
Yes,
Please.
thank you.
While we were talking, I was thinking about a story once. I had an offer on a condominium in Pioneer Square. And I was on this was back in the old days when you actually sat down with with the seller and the listing agent at their house, and you hammered them, and we argued, and it was mostly friendly, but you had interaction with the people. I was running late. I couldn't find a place to park, so I'm on the phone, calling the agent and calling the seller. I'm running a little late. I'll be there, blah, blah, blah. I get there maybe 10 minutes late. I ring the doorbell. He buzzes me upstairs. It's Phillip, from wherever I was at that time, I think, Burien, but he buzzes me. I go up the elevator. I knock on the door. He opens the door and says, "What the hell do you want?" That's the Pacific Northwest. Yeah. Okay? Because he was not expecting me to be black. And when he saw me there, it scared him. That's what happened. I mean, his reaction was fear. It was fear-based. It was all ignorant. It's how people get shot. It's how, you always go, how did that happen? What, that doesn't make sense. But right there at that moment is how that happens. And that's the Pacific Northwest. I don't know if that's the Pacific Northwest necessarily, but that's the kind of the covert or the not so in your face racism that I'm used to in Philadelphia, where we threw rocks at each other and screamed at each other and called each other's names. We weren't trying to make anybody comfortable in Philadelphia, whereas in Seattle there's this idea that everybody is okay. Hey, you're all right until you knock on somebody's door. That also happened to me in the Chinese community. I was working with a woman who was in charge of the Asian affairs at the University of Washington, trying to buy a house in Chinatown. She was Filipina, and the house was owned by a Chinese mother whose son was taking care of it for her. And when I called him and said I had an offer, I came to the house 11 o'clock at night. And when I got there, he opened the door and goes, "It's too late to do this now." That's what he said to me. And later on, I found out from him and his mother, because the next day we got a chance to sit down with them. And the mom said, "I'm really sorry. I just thought your buyer was black." She just said it to me. That's why we didn't do this last night. And now by this time, there's other offers, and the woman never got the house. And I said, I put out I had her business card, had her picture on it. And she's not black, she's Filipina. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." That was okay though. See, I'd rather have that reaction than the "what do you want" reaction. Because the Chinese mom just told me what the problem was. "I thought your buyer was black." Just like that, without any emotion. As if I'm not going to sell the house to a black person, period. Mm-hmm. But she didn't have to say that. She just said, "I just thought your buyer was black. I'm so sorry. Tell her I'm sorry." So
That is when we moved here from Philadelphia. We moved here because my dad is an air traffic controller for Boeing, and Boeing had shut down its Vertol plant on the East Coast, and there was not a air traffic controller position for him on the Eastern Seaboard, and he couldn't be without work. And so he did his interview here in Seattle via phone. And he was interviewed and he was hired. Now his boss, I remember he went to work for Boeing in 1968, same year as King being shot. As the only black air traffic controller, he retired in 2010 as the only black air traffic controller. And so we get in our car and we're moving this way, and his boss had said to the team, "They'll never, ever make me hire a nigger. They'll never make me." because, there was all of these equal opportunity stuff, and he was like, I'll never hire a nigger. I don't care what. It's not going to happen. And so my dad comes out here to Seattle, and he walks in his first day, and the guys all looked at him and said, and he thought, well, that's a reaction. That's interesting. And they were great guys. I mean, my dad had the best coworkers ever. But in walks his boss about 30 minutes after he had been there. And his first thing his boss ever said to him, I didn't put in a work order. Why are you here? I didn't put in a work order. Because he assumed that my father was some sort of maintenance man. In his starch, if you knew my dad, this would be really hilarious. In his starch navy blue slacks, his IBM white pressed shirt, and his red tie, he was the maintenance man. And he said, hi, I'm Ed. And he tells the story now. He said he just went completely colorless. He stood there for about 3 minutes in total silence. And finally he said, well, you're here. Not welcome. Not let's get started. Well, you're here. Okay then. And that was his boss for several years. That's the Pacific Northwest. That's the reality. And at that time he was at Painfield, so he was in Everett, in its own world that Everett was at that time. And that's just kind of what it means to live in the Pacific Northwest.
My mother was raised in Utah, Mormon, no blacks, I don't think, in the whole state.
I didn't see any when I was there.
We were raised in Lakewood. In high school, there was one black person. He was a foreign exchange student. Oh, to backtrack, my dad was called into the Korean War, so we lived in Japan for 3.5 years. So I had a little bit of that type of background. And then I guess I've just been being my whole life. I rode the bus. I rode an Arctic bus. And the best seat for my back, because of the roads and no shocks on any of the buses, I always sit in the back. But because I was a skycav, wore steel-toed boots, a skycap jacket, and now Doc Martens, I guess what happened is just being this life, it just happened that all kinds of people are around me wherever I go. I haven't had encounters. I guess I've been protected, sitting in the back of the bus or walking downtown the streets, talking to everybody, saying hello, exploring down alleyways, etc. Not real dark alleyways. So that was that just came to me this evening. That, I'm just here and all kinds of different people around me. It just happened.
That's a gift. That's a gift of being proximate to all kinds of people. And not everyone will understand that gift. Not everyone will know that journey. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you. I don't think it's going to reach.
Oh, yeah. No, it'll reach.
Oh. That is a super mic.
Hi.
Okay.
Oh.
I've just been sitting here observing and also taking in and recognizing my experiences and stories. And I'm hearing words that are triggering me, such as innocence and naive. Because as a black person, I don't get to be those characteristics. Not even as an infant do you get those characteristics to have innocence or naivete. So that's triggering. And I wanted to talk about my first encounter with race. I guess racism. It wasn't a personal experience, but I grew up in Southeast DC, which was a black neighborhood. But once in a while, the KKK would have their parade through our neighborhood. And it wasn't police. I don't remember guards being out there. But the KKK in their robes, with their hateful messages, was just there in the neighborhood. And we had no right to say anything or do anything, but just be a witness to that. So that was just the most hateful thing. As far as outside of that, learning about code switching. I didn't learn about code switching. It's just something that automatically happens. You're just in a different space, so you're not the same as you're with your friends. You're not using the same language. Your tone is different. Because if you use your regular voice, you have an attitude automatically. Who's angry? Who's sassy? Nobody. That's just my voice. So moving here to Pacific Northwest, it's just different. There's passive aggressiveness. You can't really tell who could be racist, who's not. I can admit to say that I'm scared of some of my neighbors just because I don't know who they are. So like I've been in my apartment complex for 6 years. So I've seen it. People come and people go. You kind of recognize faces. But with the change of faces and the change of the times, I'm basically scared of some of my neighbors. They're white men. I've had like visions and dreams that I'm going to be assaulted by a white man if something breaks out here in Seattle. And I just want to have peace of mind. I want to know when is going to be my chance to have peace of mind, because I don't think we're there yet.
I don't think we're there yet, and thank you for saying that we are triggered, because we're triggered so often and so regularly that we don't take the time to name that we're triggered, because we live in a perpetual state of being triggered. For the sake of conversation in a community, even in this seat, I have to fight my natural propensity to correct, right? So we talked about, at one point, Native Americans as Indians. And my natural go-to is indigenous people. But we're having a conversation, right? And trying to make it safe. And how do we be safe? And to your question of when will it be our turn to go to bed and not be triggered, that is the question that I'm hoping moments like this will lead us to, counterbalance with the awareness that we may, I'm kind of like Dr. King. I may not get there with you, but mine eyes have seen that I vision a world where we won't be triggered. And this is a movement toward that, but I hope my daughter gets to go to bed and be safe.
What can we do to be more than just responsible for ourselves as a community?
I think we're doing it. I think it starts with this conversation, because someone said last month's conversation changed my interaction, and this month's conversation will change the next interaction, and who's in here will take it out to their circles, and it's on the web, and it's, you know what I'm saying? So I think this is our way of being responsible for more than our community. And then we take a stand in our spheres of influence. and we say, this is not going to work. I'm not okay with this. As a man, I have to say to my colleagues, no, you don't get to take her idea. That was hers. Thanks. Thanks, though. Appreciate that. Let's go back to the originator of the idea as you just restated what she said in this meeting and acted like it was yours. No, we're not going to do that. So, like, we have to own that space and take that responsibility, I think. I think I saw a hand there and a hand there. Yes, sir. There it is.
Well, what I want to say really comes from a deeper perspective on life, and I agree with everything everybody has said, but we're missing the bigger problem. There's a reason these things are happening. There's a reason our societies have, well, first mainly is because they don't know the other race. They have no knowledge of, and so their automatic things, well, you're different, I don't know about you, so I'll automatically dislike you. So based with that, and it really comes to divide and conquer. We all have to at some point admit that there is a higher power of beings that have, you could say, evil control over this world and how it is set up and the way it is as far as media, news, movies, music. All this stuff is influencing our kids and everything that's going on. Mm-hmm. That is the real influence to racism. Nobody is born racist. Mm-hmm. And so we are being taught this through a power that we keep avoiding talking about. And racism is not going to end until the powers that be do end. And they're not going to end until we are conscious of them and start talking about them. I'll leave that at that.
I totally agree with you. I think, in particular, the way in which we demand mass media begin to change. There's a new show on television. Oh no, I wasn't thinking of White Famous, but I did watch White Famous the other day for the first time. No, it's The Mayor. Oh. Have you all seen this, The Mayor? This is tomfoolery. This is foolishness. So here's this inner city urban kid who happens to be black who becomes the mayor. But he nor his friends know anything about politics. They don't know anything about how a city runs. He's a rapper. It's buffoonery at its highest level. And it's media's response to Barack Obama's presidency. It's the backlash that says, now we let you put a black man in the White House, but don't make a habit of it. Because black people are for entertainment, not for political leadership. And this is on a major network. This is network television. This isn't cable. This is network television. And it's designed to make us laugh so that we will forget what the underlying message really is. And there's no cultural critique that demands that it be taken off of television. Right, and we can quit watching it. And I keep tuning in because I'm looking for a redeeming quality. I keep thinking, okay, next week this is going to turn. It's going to be, nope, not. It is exactly what I knew it was when I saw the premiere for it. And so you're right, there are influences, and it is systemic, and it is broad, and there are powers that be. And we have to have that conversation, that larger conversation. And we have to hold one another accountable for how we engage it.
The point about the media and about how it makes us afraid of each other.
Yeah.
And, the evening news, one thing after another, it's the murder, rape, and arson report, right? Mm-hmm. And it just makes us afraid of each other. And, I've kind of stopped watching it because I don't want to be afraid anymore. I was touched by your story that your wife at a stoplight hit the button to lock all her car doors. I did that myself several years back with a group of young black men on the corner, and I'm there in my little car all by myself, and I hit the button and they heard it. And yeah, they responded to it too. And I was embarrassed. And yet at the same time I thought, yeah, I was afraid. And that kind of fear is just, I mean, it's visceral, so you want to protect yourself. You don't want anything bad to happen. But at the same time, that fear separates us. And that's what made me feel bad, is that maybe I didn't need to be afraid of them. And, some of it is that, clearly I'm 4'10". So, I mean, white guys are scary to me too, right? But actually, if you know me, I'm a force to be reckoned with. But I try to not be afraid. And I think and maybe that's just the boldest step that I can make, is just to say, I want to have an open heart. I grew up on the East Side. I remember the first time I saw a black person at the Fred Meyer store. I distinctly remember it. Mm-hmm. And yet that was a long time ago. And I just try to, I guess for people who try to do better, it's just a matter of trying to be conscious and trying to not be afraid.
That's a great step. We are constantly inundated with intentionality around creating that fear. The evening news talks about black on black crime as though that's a real thing, but you never hear about white on white crime. You have never heard them say, we've got to do something about this white on white crime. It's got to stop. But most of the crimes against white people are committed by, and most of the crimes against black people are committed by. I mean, this is just a statistical truth. We created the term black on black crime to deflect attention away from police brutality and away from alarming crime rates in the suburbs. And so we said there's a problem with black people are normally victims of crime by someone in proximity to them. Crime is about proximity. Who's closest to you? That's where the crime is going to happen. And so we are inundated with these fear-based initiatives that are driving a narrative in our minds. And if you can consciously reframe that conversation, you can live outside of that fear. You really can.
My roommate came home this summer and told me this story, driving down Martin Luther King, and with her top down on her car. And some people, black guys in a car, said something to her that she says ordinarily in the past, as she recollects, would have scared the poop out of her. But it didn't. Am I telling the story right? It didn't. And she said, well, this time that I've had with you, this time that I have lived with you, and we've had these kinds of conversations, because we do this a lot, what we're doing right now, my roommate and I. She says to me that I wasn't afraid. And I, just in the car, she didn't lock her doors, she didn't put her top up. She actually, you said something back, right, to the people in the car?
Well, he called Grandma.
Yeah.
Nice car or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh.
But the point was that, Carol wasn't afraid, and that's, if you living with me made you not afraid that day, then there's hope for her. There's hope. That's somebody wanted to know what we have to do. That's it. That's what we have to do. Mm-hmm. Because fear is like the worst thing ever. It's the dark side. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Well, you know how you said that we're not born racist? Racism is shaped and it's infusing it into a child. We have the power to change that. I don't know if any of you are childbearing age, but even as grandparents, you have the power to change that, how a child feels about race. because like I had said, when living on the east side and my kids were experiencing it, I was so shocked that these little kids were coming up with these phrases, these racial slurs and everything. I'm like, where are they getting this from? And I didn't realize, I mean, I was just so shocked. I'm like, where are they hearing this? But they're hearing it from their parents. And these are the way that parents are feeling, but we have the power to change that. If you have access to children, if you see, your grandchildren or friends' kids, you have the power to change their mind about how they feel about race. And that's where it's going to start, because we're the older generation, but it's this new generation that's coming up they're going to have their own mindset about things. And they're, it's whatever we're feeding into them. So.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes. You're the
Hi,
man.
I'm Reginald Johnson.
Hi.
And I'm retired military, so I kind of relate to what you're saying, and I'm glad you guys are up here. And it does start with a conversation, but it can't end with a conversation. You got to have some action, okay? And we talk about racism as a black person, not as African American. I'm just saying as a black person. We feel it. You're talking about privilege. I mean, we feel that the cards are stacked against us. As soon as we walk out the door, the cards are stacked against us. And again, being military and traveling, color has always been an issue. I mean, I lived in Saudi Arabia for 2 years, and the light-skinned Saudis were treated differently than the dark-skinned Saudis. Even in America, the light-skinned people are treated different than the dark-skinned people. And there's got to be a change, and I feel what you're saying, and I know it's going to be a change somewhere. I just don't know where it's going to happen or when it's going to start. But, I mean, being at home and just being with other black people, and we're sitting in a conversation, having a conversation about race, and the N-word pops out all the time, and I'm like, why? We got to stop saying it. Because if we stop saying it, then maybe other people will stop saying it. But we invite it, and we say it's something that's supposed to be beloved, and I'm like, no, it's not. That's a nasty word. I mean, Martin Luther King walked. My grandmother was in Montgomery, and she walked to get rid of those words. But we still invite them, and it's hurting. But we talk about backroom conversations, and I see it's different colors here, but we all know who they are. I mean, we got friends that don't want to have that change. They don't want to, they don't want to be with white people, and white people don't want to be with black people, and Asians don't want to be with blacks, and it's everybody knows who they are. And instead of us stepping up and saying, hey, look, that's wrong, we sit back in the corner and we say nothing because they are friends. But I'm telling you, when I hear my friends say that, I say that's wrong. And I don't want to be a part of it. And if I got to be by myself, then that's what I have to do. But we got to make a change. And it's got to start somewhere. And these conversations are getting it there. So when you have friends that say, well, that makes me uncomfortable to talk about that, then you need to look at them and say, what's wrong with that? Well, why are you so uncomfortable with that? What's your problem? And start it with there. Our children are growing up with racism because it's coming from home. And we know that. But we continue to tolerate it. We continue to tolerate it. But then we come out in the open, like nothing's happened, and we forget about it. We can't forget about it. It's got to start with you guys. It's got to start there. And I appreciate you guys being up here talking about it. And I appreciate you, Karen, for inviting me. But there's a whole lot of other things that can be said on the conversation. And until people start opening up and not being afraid and not being angry, because we all have an opinion, okay? And I think what we ought to do is respect each other's opinion. You know, regardless of what it is, we still need to respect that. You know, you're not going to change me. I'm not going to change you, but this is my opinion, this is your opinion, and I respect that. Now, how can we make a change? You know, and lastly, I mean, we all talk about racism. I'm racist. We're all racist in a way. But, you know, every morning I get up, I consciously think about what I'm going to do today in this world. If I encounter somebody that I think that's rude, I'm not going to retaliate with rudeness. You know, if I encounter some black kids coming in front of me, I'll do the same thing you guys do. I'm going to cross the street because we talk about safety.
Yeah.
You know, you got to think of yourself first, okay? So there's nothing wrong with that. That's not being racist. That's just being cautious. I am thinking of myself because I want to get back home to my family. You know, regardless if it's two black guys or two white guys coming at me, I'm going to cross the street because I don't want to go through them because then now me have a problem. Okay? So there's nothing wrong with that. You know? And again, I appreciate you guys being up here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to leave us just with this one thought, why this conversation is really important. I want us to remember that when we're talking about racism, sexism, et cetera, we're talking about proximation to death. We're talking about, in America right now, the death rate of black children, infant mortality of black children versus infant mortality of the dominant culture. The numbers are staggering. We're talking about children that go to bed hungry in America, the percentage of black children that go to bed hungry versus the percentage of dominant culture children that go to bed hungry in America, staggering. This conversation matters because we intend to leave the world better than we found it. We intend to heal the world with our presence, and we cannot do it if we are afraid to say what's broken. So we have to keep having these conversations because we have to keep naming what's broken until the world is healed. Thank you so much.
So again, I want to thank you all for coming. I want to remind you next month, Reggie, I want to make sure you're here. Next month is about what are we going to do? You know, so individually I think it's, I wish the person was here. Not sensei, but if you make one small change, it can have a ripple effect. Mm-hmm. And an example is UPS bus drivers complained that it was taking them too long to deliver. And it was because they were stopped at a stoplight making left turns. And so they redid all their routes to make right turns. It saved gas. It saved them time. It saved them their anger. And so each one of us can start to think about, when we come back next month, what's one small thing that we can do? Because looking at the big thing, if we look at that, it can be frightening and it could be like, we don't know what to do. But each one of us can do something small. Talk to a homeless person pardon? Kzen, thank you. Thank you. You were there. You remember. Thank you. Kzen, look it up. So that's going to be next month. Again, there is a love offering basket at the back of the room, so I know this is a free event. You do not have to give. It is a love offering. However, I would like to honor these people that took time out of their evening to be here and talk to us about their experiences. Again, thank you all so much, and I hope to see you and all your friends back here next month.